Welcome back to the program. Good morning. Glad you're with us this morning. Happy Thursday. It is approximately 8:18 right here in the Northeast Caribbean. Say good morning to my good friend, our managing editor of Green Broadcasting Network News and the host of St. Maarten Insights News that matters to you, Emil Lee. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Stock. Good morning, listeners.
And
It would help if the sound's on. Yeah. Good
that's right.
morning, Stock. Good morning,
That's right.
listeners.
Nice if I
Nice
turn
to
the
be
right.
back.
Nice if I turn the right microphone on.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Everybody moves, and what are you gonna do? I'll get there. Anyway, how's everything this morning? How you doing?
Great.
Okay.
I had my motorcycle ride over. Oh my gosh. Yesterday, I don't know if you saw on the Colbay Hill, one of those big tour buses apparently broke down on the hill. Traffic was just
I did see that,
stopped everywhere.
and I feel bad for the tourists.
Ugh, horrible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what a bad experience.
I mean, I know people who were, for example, going to paddle and they just said, well, forget it. They stopped and
Go
went
home.
home.
Yeah,
So.
it is. What
But
it is.
yesterday, press was good. We had
Good.
the
What
Prime
was?
Minister, we had the Minister of Romy, and the Minister of VSA in. And
So let's start with VSA, because I know we.
well, let's start with Romy because you're gonna like this.
Okay.
So Romy, they are putting a delegation together from within the ministry, and they're going to Aruba,
Mhm.
and they're going to see how they manage their solid waste processes in Aruba. I wasn't aware that Aruba is like this. Stellar example for St. Martin. But okay, I mean, it makes sense in that they have the same sort of legislative basis. Their laws started from the same place as St. Martin, so that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then I asked him. I said, okay, look, if you're going to Aruba to talk about that, why don't you also go to Aruba to talk about net metering? Because Aruba does have a net metering policy. If I remember, their company's called, I think, LMR or something like that, and they pay 85% of the tariff of the rate for electricity. So in other words, if you put back into the grid, you get back 85 cents on the dollar for it. So
That's cool.
I said, so if you're going with a whole delegation, why would you only talk about one topic, right?
Mm.
Here's another thing: how are you managing your
And what was the
renewable
what was
process?
what was the answer to that?
Yeah, our agenda's pretty full. But he said, I will try. I will try and at least make the contacts so that they can continue the conversation when they're, not there. So I thought you would find that interesting. I am pushing this
Yeah, but
renewable energy discussion.
it just doesn't make sense that we're not doing this, and I've got to the point where I've just said, "Oh, the hell with it," right?
Yeah,
And I put
just
in
put in batteries.
I put in batteries, and I think I'm going to add probably 8 more panels. I have one more spot that I can fit a few more, um, and I just got my last GB bill through the middle of January, and we didn't really start having all the batteries and everything up and running till about the 23rd of December, and I produced 91% of my own electricity over that period.
Super.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and I'm hoping that we've had a lot of rain, a fair amount of clouds, but even on a cloudy day, we still make it, well, and with both guest houses full. I'm gonna look right now. I'm gonna give you real information. Both guest houses were full. They both have visitors in them, and I made it till. So that means everybody's running the air conditioning 24/7. There are 3 of us in the main house at the moment. We made it on battery uh, at until midnight last night, and we pretty much were on battery from about we were either on the roof living off the sun from about just about this time, and like right now I am producing all of the electricity that I need from the sun, and I'm charging the battery a teeny bit at the same time already at 8:22 in the morning.
But it is a bright blue sunny day.
Right.
Thank goodness.
But even if I wasn't, so even if I wasn't, right,
Yeah,
I would still be, producing some of it,
absolutely.
right? And I if we have a bright sunny day, we'll completely charge up all the batteries, and I'll make it almost 24/7 if the guest houses aren't empty.
So again, just for
Yeah.
our listeners to understand, a net metering policy
Right.
is the utility company's policy towards taking back energy from people like yourself who produce solar energy and feed it back into the grid,
Right.
which would mean then you don't have to have all these batteries. You can just feed it into the grid.
What it means is that you could just have
Just panels.
just panels, and you don't need all the batteries.
Exactly.
to
And
start.
so as an investment, I mean, the batteries and the inverter, I guess, do you still need the inverter? Yeah,
Yeah,
you would still need the inverter, but you just wouldn't need the batteries. But the investment's much less because the batteries are expensive.
The batteries are expensive, but you can buy solar panel the good solar between you can buy the good solar panels for $150 to $200 a panel. Um, you could buy the ones with the microinverters already in them on each panel.
So it just makes
and
the investment easier to make.
would make life. It would make if we had a net metering policy here.
Right.
I would have never bought the batteries.
Exactly.
And
and GB would have profited by having
that-
somebody produce energy and giving it to them at a discount,
Well, yeah,
So
they would. Listen, it doesn't have to be 85. If it was 50 cents on the dollar,
something.
right?
Right.
It would make a huge difference to people.
Exactly. But
so-
I wonder, just thinking about so the whole solid waste thing,
Mhm.
I wonder if it really needs a whole delegation to go to Aruba to see, how they push garbage around, how they manage their recycling process. But okay.
The rest of the world does this.
Right.
I mean, why is it such a challenge for us? I don't understand.
But anyways, we will follow up.
Right.
We will, and that's why I said, things are starting to change, at least from my perspective. Now that we have some consistency in government, right? I've only been there since November or December last year,
Right.
and government's always been changing, right? So at least now we have some consistency, and we can start holding them accountable and say, okay, you spent all this money.
What'd you learn?
What'd you learn? What'd you
And
come back with?
And what do you do? And how you spent all our taxpayer dollars?
Right. How is this going to translate it to the people
I want to
here?
see I want to see the ROI. What's the return on investment?
Exactly. So, but anyways, it's good. And I will say, at least in our area, there's a lot of paving going on. The resurfacing of the roads makes it a lot better. So, hats off. I did off air. I did ask him. I said, some of the areas that I see you paving, you can clearly see that there's probably septic water from running. And if that's constant, the roads are just going to fall apart again. So you need to deal with, the root causes of why the roads are, degrading in the first place. So
yeah, you need to have proper drainage. There has to be a proper amount of process of all of the gravel and the stone underneath the road, so that whatever is under it can properly drain.
Right.
The roads need to be pitched so the water runs from the center off to the side.
And the roads need to be thick enough. The base needs to be solid. Exactly.
Well, you need 3 to probably 6 feet of proper base underneath
Exactly. Right.
for this stuff to work the right way.
You can't do it right. I mean, you don't see the airport runway which is asphalt, right, with potholes in it. It just couldn't happen because it was done correctly.
Right.
And then, sure, they spent more money on it. It's critical infrastructure. So this comes back as a budget issue.
Well, it also shows that we know how to do it. We're choosing not to.
Right. Well, it's a budget. It's a
Right.
budget question. It's how much money they have to put into the roads. Exactly. He also did say they're coming out with a digital complaint form. There's a QR code that you can scan, and I know there's a lot of people who are sort of cynical about it. I would say though, let's give Romy and the ministry a chance. So it's an opportunity to say, hey, here's water, septic water that's leaching into the roads. Take a picture of it, send it into Romy, report it. Or noise complaints, or all those kinds of things. By all means, he's saying, please, let's use their new digital complaint system. So I would support that. Let's
try it.
Let's try it. If you don't try, you can't complain that that they're not doing what you asked. So, VSI, you wanted to go to VSI.
Yeah. So you asked a lot of questions of the minister of VSI, Minister Brugg.
Last week.
Yeah. Who I don't know.
Right.
And you asked him some questions about his opinion on the national health insurance that
Right.
which he
Still.
still has no opinion on.
No, I don't think he's read it yet. Yes, and that's
A-
disappointing.
And
Also about the hospital,
you asked him
the
about the
price
hospital.
increase,
Yeah,
and any design changes.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what were the answers on that?
He still didn't have it. He said then he got a message while he was there. And according to him, the hospital said, well, there's a confidentiality clause between the hospital and the contractor, and therefore the price increases and discussions are confidential.
I'm sorry, these are taxpayer dollars. It's not confidential information.
Yeah, so I do understand because indeed, if I think back, I think there is an element of confidentiality in the contracts.
Don't want to see the contract. I just want to know what the price is.
What happened to the price? And I think the public indeed has a right to know, and it's going to come out eventually. What I didn't like is when Minister Janssen was the Minister of VSA and she was in Parliament. Parliament asked about the price increase. And she gave them what was the price increase. But I didn't like her answer because it was a really tricky answer. She said, look, there have been 4 price increases, and the difference between the third and the fourth increase was something like $1 million, roughly. It's not a huge amount. But it didn't give an indication from the time that the contract was signed to now what's the price increase, right?
Yeah, but here's what I think the public has the right to know: that when did the original contract for the hospital get signed?
Oof, I forget. This was during my tenure, so this
So
was
2014, 15.
And I'll tell you, then it was about $120 million.
120 million US.
Right. And that included the calculation based on interest.
Okay.
What the total payment was.
So
right?
here we are, almost a decade later in 2020. Actually, more than a decade later.
Yeah.
In 2025, and it was 120 million dollars in 2014, 15 to build the hospital, including all fully in all costs, everything. So what's the number today? And the difference between those two, the delta, you take the difference between the two, you divide by 120 million, and that's the cost increase.
Well,
It's arithmetic.
And so one of my colleagues, BB, asked, what was the reason for the increase? And they gave again, I didn't really like the answer. They said it had to do with COVID, which I understand. COVID's a valid reason. I think it was like the Ukraine war, and I forget, there was a third one. So
The Ukraine war.
yeah.
Listen, I could live with COVID. I could live with.
I mean, yes,
supply chain being the
disrupted and
disruptive, and the magnitude of the inflation that we've experienced globally would be legitimate reasons for a cost increase from 120 million to some new number. What is the new number?
and another unofficial sources estimate they've heard, so rumor is something around the 40 million. So if that's true, that's a big increase.
So we're going to 160 mil is the rumor.
That's the rumor. And that maybe there's been a reduction in the design of the building. So which would mean you've also reduced what you're getting. So you're paying more for less. Again, so I will say all of this is rumor at the moment. And this is because there isn't clarity. But if it's something along those lines, it's a sizable increase, right? And it's at least worthy of a discussion. I think the public at least should have some sense of what's happened.
That's a third.
It's a third, yeah.
That's a third.
And the problem is you would say, okay, has construction in private sector increased that much as well? I think there's been an increase, but not 33%, right?
Yeah, for sure. So that's a big number.
It's a big number.
And the fact that we're just not being
forthcoming.
Yeah, with it is a problem.
And then the question becomes, how did you finance it, right?
Well, yeah.
Because if you built a house for, $100,000 and then it jumped by by $30,000, how would you finance that, right? So maybe the financiers have just agreed to step up, or maybe World Bank stepped in. I have no idea, but again, there's questions, and that should be answered. So we'll keep on drilling down into it, because the more expensive the hospital, eventually that means the hospital has to charge enough money to repay those loans, right?
Right.
Unless they're grants. So the other thing the Minister of VSA talked about is he is launching a Minister in Your Neighborhood program. So once a month, he's going to go into the neighborhood.
What's he calling it?
Minister in Your Neighborhood.
Okay.
And so he says, yeah, this is in response to comments from people that, oh, we only see you during elections and we don't see you in the neighborhood the rest of the time. So while I understand, of course, and I've heard those comments before, this feels a little bit like campaigning, like a constant campaign strategy. So I don't know. We'll see. I think it would make more sense. Like the Minister of Finance, they have office hours that they say, they open to the public to come in.
Minister in your
neighborhood, yeah.
Don't even get me started.
Yeah, so it kind of a question mark in my mind again.
I want to go back to the cost stuff.
Yeah.
So we're the rumor is it's a third
right
increase.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to say that we've made design changes, and it's become, the building itself has become less expensive based on the original estimate, but all the other factors that have caused this increase.
Well, the building wouldn't be more expensive, right? They're saying the cost increase is due to construction costs going up, right? So,
right. And
but they may have reduced the size a little bit, which
the scope, and I'm okay with that, right? But we as the public, as the taxpayers, should know that the original price was X, the new price is Y. We're up 40 mil if that's in fact the truth,
right?
And don't sugarcoat it. Just rip the Band-Aid off and tell us
and explain why. Because I do know
and how you're paying for it.
Right, exactly. And I do know the contract before had performance agreements, right? There was a deadline for the construction, and if you missed the deadline, there were penalties to pay. So
right.
Did you subtract those penalties? Are those penalties still in place? Have you? So I think there's some things.
Did you renegotiate the contract? All of those.
Right.
Things.
So what are the significant changes exactly?
Okay.
So we'll keep on asking about the hospital and the general health insurance, etc. So the Prime Minister, well, you saw in the news he's talking about financial support for Telem. So there's a question there. But one of the things he talked about is that based on a motion that was made in Parliament, they are going to come with a financial assistance package for civil servants for funeral costs. So there were some questions about, is it determined by your time of service in government? And he said no, from the day you become a civil servant. So in the past, from a decision in 1996, they agreed to a 4,500 guilder maximum financial assistance for burial costs for civil servants. And they're now going to increase that to 9,000 guilders. So, I don't know how they budgeted for this. I don't know how in practice, if this is, 2 people a year or I don't know what the number looks like.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And please understand, I don't want this to sound crude. I don't want this to sound insensitive. But why is it the taxpayers? Why is it all of everyone? Why is it partially your responsibility and partially my responsibility to pay for the funeral expenses of a family member of a civil servant? Why is that our responsibility? That's my question. And listen.
So there's a.
Go ahead.
Because again, from what I remember, the civil servants is basically comprised of all eligible voters, right? So ministries have a tendency to be, to look at them as part of their possible or probable voter base, right? And so I do think that there's sometimes a little too much consideration. Very often, for example, if there's holidays like around Christmas time, you have the official holidays, right? And that's what private sector adheres to. The public sector, they have a tendency to just add extra days. And then there's, whatever, Women's Day, Men's Day. So they tend to give
Well,
extra days
and
that
and we
are
pay,
not official holidays
and
that we
we the
end up paying.
taxpayers pay for,
Right.
and you're there to do our business, the
Right.
business of the people.
Another thing, I understood that I think every department head there has a vehicle. Does that really make financial sense, right? There are some people, I mean, like labor inspectors, building inspectors, of course they need a vehicle, right? But does every department head really need to have their own vehicle?
Well,
When I go to pick up my son at school, I see a ton of L plates, and those are all government vehicles.
so here's the real question, right? Does your job description require you to spend a lot of your time on the road traveling for what your job responsibilities are? And if the answer to that is yes, then you look at what the mileage rate is that you would pay someone for traveling in their vehicle per mile, and their job says that they're going to do X number a year, right? So then it makes sense. It's cheaper to have a vehicle for that position.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe your job is that you run a department and you go from your house to the office every day. You manage a department. At the end of the day, you go home.
Well, and in private sector where you have people who it's not critical. I mean, obviously, if you are delivering products, your employee needs a truck to go deliver your products, right?
Right.
But if somebody's just occasionally on the road, you would just compensate them and say, okay, look, keep a mileage log. I'll pay you per mile, or I'll give you some sort of a
fuel allowance or
exactly an
whatever.
allowance. I mean, my daughter works for one of the liquor companies, and that's what they do. They give her, vouchers for fuel that helps to compensate her time on the road. So, I mean, there's other mechanisms to do that, because once it's a government vehicle, all of a sudden you're responsible for the maintenance on it, all
The
the
road
other.
tax, all that other stuff.
And I was just thinking, I don't know, have you ever been, well, if you've ever been through an audit here, right? One of the things that they look at is, do you have a company cell phone? Because if you do, they consider that a benefit and they tax you. If you have a company vehicle, if you have a percentage of that is for personal use, they will tax you. They will say, well, this is a benefit to you. And they will, in the audit, they'll calculate a tax and say, okay, this is a benefit. So I wonder if anyone has ever sort of verified the package and the amount of taxes for civil servants and what government pays, if that's been done correctly. And so it's going to be one of my next Council of Ministers questions.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you this. I'll give you an example. Like, I spend a lot of time, going from work to see customers.
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time going from the studio to events that
Right,
I'm invited to.
right.
I don't have a company car.
Right.
No.
Right.
Periodically, the radio station will buy me a tank of gas.
Right.
Periodically.
That makes sense.
Depending on how much, there's no reason for, these extravagant. We talk about how broke we are and how much money we don't have, yet we spend $700,000 on the Soul Beach Music Festival unbudgeted, and every department head has a car. Is that a true statement? If that's a true statement, that just flabbergasts me. That flabbergast. Can we ask that? Can we confirm?
Confirm
that
what's the
every
policy in terms of vehicle? Yeah.
Let me do this, Emil. I'm way late. Let me get caught up, and we'll come back more St. Maarten Insights news that matters to you. It's 8:42 right here in the Northeast Caribbean. More with Emil Lee on the way. St. Maarten Insights news that matters to you. Okay, 8:49 right here in the Northeast Caribbean. Glad you're with us this morning. Of course, you know what happens starts later today. The Caribbean Multi-Hull Challenge. They're out racing today, 7th annual, and between 12 and 3 this afternoon, I'm going to be down at the Dutch Blonde Beach Bar helping to commentate some of the racing that's happening right in Great Bay. The small DM multi-hulls, the trimarans are all racing. There's like 10 or 12 of them, and super fast, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So a few
So
hours
where are
of
they racing actually?
in Great Bay.
In Great Bay.
Yeah,
Okay.
be it
Cool.
Windward Leeward kind of races. So I'm down there from 12 to 3 this afternoon
Okay.
to help commentate some of that. And so
So one of the other questions I asked to the Prime Minister, again, when we go to press, we're trying to do it different than other media houses. So I've been using the different parties' governing platforms, their campaign manifestos, to ask them questions about how they're executing. But I pointed out to them, I said, look, you have 4 different parties, and each of them, so you have the PFP, the URSM, the DP, and the SAM, and each of them have their own approaches, their own philosophies, their own objectives. I said, but you have one government. So you as government need to get on one page in terms of what are the priorities and what are you going to do. And he totally agreed. I mean, in his response, he talked about cooperation and compromise. So that's indeed a whole negotiation process in terms of what this government as a whole is going to do. And that's going to be reflected in their governing program. And even in budget debate, it came up and said, here you're talking about a budget for the country, but where's your governing program? Because that's what's going to, provide the direction of the country, and your budget needs to align with your governing program. So he said, look, they made an agreement between the partners that they would have that within 3 months from the time they swore in. So that's November 26th is when they swore in. So means by the end of February, they should have their governing program in place. And you can see it. Like, for example, in the budget debate, they were talking about marijuana, right? And it's clear that there's some dissenting opinions about whether you should legalize. And actually, to be honest, and this is one of the questions, again, we need to ask, are you talking about just decriminalizing, or are you talking about becoming a producer? Are you talking about medicinal use? You're talking about recreational use? How are you going to control if people are, driving under the influence? There's a whole host of questions that need to be worked out. And so as a government, for example, they need to decide, okay, in regards to marijuana, this is what government's approach is going to be, and that should be a compromise between the different parties and their objectives, right? So,
well, I would think we have trouble enforcing anything here, which is a big problem. I would also venture a guess that whatever policy or procedure that we put in place with marijuana, um, we need to think about those in our society that don't necessarily know better, right? And our kids, right?
For example, exactly.
And the last thing we want to do is encourage those that are young, fragile minds that are developing to engage in activity that may make it harder for them to focus on going to school, studying hard, and becoming productive members of society. As adults, we should know better. And if we have a segment of our population that doesn't know better, how are we going to handle that?
And I think, if I recall, I saw an article recently, I think from Turning Point, right? So Turning Point is one of the entities that helps people with substance abuse.
Right.
And they said we wouldn't be able to handle an increase in abuse problems, right? So, I mean, is your supporting infrastructure there if you want to make this change? And what I'm afraid of is actually, because indeed they're talking about producing, so they're talking about growing here. So, unfortunately, things in St. Martin happen because there's a profit motive. There's a couple players who are looking to get into the industry and want to make money. And so, Is that really the motivation? So first outline what's the problem that you're trying to solve and what's your objective, right? So some places they decriminalize because if the law says, if they catch you with, I don't know, 2 joints, you have to go to jail, right? Our jails are full already.
Right.
So, is that the perspective, or is it this, you believe this is an industry that you want to tax? Do you think there's a lot of money you're going to make from that? Or, it's not, for me, it's not clear. And
Well, it feels like it's not all at all thought out,
right.
right? And if your goal is simply to decriminalize it on the street, well, then you need to have the right. You need to figure out what the parameters are by which it's okay. Personal consumption's okay, personal use is okay. How much? How are you going to regulate it so you don't have school children exposed, engaged, etc.? At
Mm-hmm.
what age is it, then deemed to be socially acceptable? All of those things need to be considered,
Absolutely.
and I have yet to hear any credible answers out of it.
And are you testing it, right? If you grow it here, for example, right? But imagine, imagine because you have iguanas, you have pests, they use a heavy insecticide on it to protect their crop and their revenues, right? Who's going to control that? So it's a much more complicated topic, and again, that's why, for me, a governing program is important, because that will lay out what government's approach and strategy is, and allows the public now to engage and to ask questions about it. So we will see by the end of February.
We'll see how it all plays out.
Yeah.
You never know. Mr. Lee, always a pleasure to see you, sir.
Always enjoy it. Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you next week for another edition of St. Maarten Insights, news that matters to you. We'll be right back. Actually, play a song or two, then we'll take your marine tropical weather update brought to you by K Beach Club and Restaurant. K like character.